What is the cause of disease, germ or terrain? Part 1. Now, I'd rather not talk of germs. I like what this writer has to say from over 100 years ago. If we had less to say in regard to microbes and more to say in regard to the matchless love and power of God, we would honor God far more. These things are dwelt upon too much, and the things we ought to know, which concern our eternal interest, receive altogether too little attention. Throw a veil over the poor, decaying earth, which is corrupted on account of the wickedness of its inhabitants, and point to the heavenly world. There is need of far more teaching in regard to having in this life a vital connection with God through Christ, that we may be fitted to enjoy heaven and dwell forever with our Lord. If we would attain to a pure and elevated ideal of character, we must lift up Jesus, the perfect example. The exalting of science will never accomplish this work. Now, I'd rather not talk about germs because I also don't have the worldly credentials to give this presentation. I'm not a medical doctor, but there is no other Bible-based Christian giving it, and people need to be informed. And I was compelled to make this presentation in 2021 because Christian leaders were falsely telling Christians not to come in contact with those who got the injections due to spike protein shedding, which has zero evidence. Avoiding in-person contact with others is in opposition to the Bible's clear teaching of Jesus that we are to share the everlasting gospel in person as Jesus did, with zero fear. I follow God, I follow the Bible, not man, and modern science fiction or the man pope. Now, I'm still learning. My mom says, if you're green, you'll grow. If you're ripe, you'll rot. And I invite you to learn with me and consider the matter. Let God be true and every man a liar. That scripture became like my motto in 2021. As I looked to the right and to the left, there were liars on both sides of this situation. And so, let God be true and every man a liar is something we all should really keep in mind. And we should just really compare everything to the Word of God for the truth. Now, I have a very radically different approach to health. My beliefs and principles align perfectly with the Bible and spirit of prophecy and common sense. So I'm a Bible-based person. I take this approach when I look at science. I believe the Bible is true and above all government alphabet agencies. And as I've said a couple of times so far, I'm going to follow God, His word, and not man. I have a terrain approach. I do not believe in germ theory, and I have followed terrain since 2003. And I follow God's health laws, the laws of our being. And I look to Jesus, the great physician, for the right approach to heal. And I ask that question commonly, why aren't you healing? Why aren't you healing? Your body is made to heal. What is blocking your healing? I believe in true science-based approach, true medicine, which uses this phrase we see in the Hippocratic Oath, first do no harm. I read the case studies and I look at the methodology of the studies. I do believe in excellent testing. I do believe in advanced trauma care. You are in a head-on collision and your leg is cut off at the scene of the collision. You're going to need advanced trauma care. So I do believe in these circumstances. I just don't go to them for chronic illnesses. It's like going to a Chinese restaurant and seeking French food. They don't know how to make it. You're not going to get it. And I do reject the AMA, the CDC, the FDA, and Big Pharma completely. Now, therefore, the urgent need to give this presentation. Now, here's another profound quote. Satan has wrought with deceiving power, bringing in a multiplicity of errors that obscure truth. Error could not stand alone and would soon become extinct if it did not fasten itself like a parasite upon the tree of truth. Error draws its life from the truth of God. The traditions of men, like floating germs, attach themselves to the truth of God, and men regard them as a part of the truth. Through false doctrines, Satan gains a foothold and captivates the minds of men, causing them to hold theories that have no foundation in truth. Men boldly teach for doctrines the commandments of men, and as traditions pass on from age to age, they acquire a power over the human mind. But age does not make error truth, neither does its burdensome weight cause the plant of truth to become a parasite. The tree of truth bears its own genuine fruit, showing its true origin and nature. The parasite of error also bears its own fruit and makes manifest that its character is diverse from the plant of heavenly origin. Great hope, though. Science does not know fully how the body works. Another quote. The mechanism of the human body cannot be fully understood. It presents mysteries that baffle the most intelligent. It is not as the result of a mechanism which, once set in motion, continues its work, that pulse beats and breath follows breath. In God we live and move and have our being. Every breath, every throb of the heart is a continual evidence of the power of an ever-present God. I'd like to give this example, and there's many I could pull, but this is interesting. Science does not know what a cell membrane is made of. There are 17 current theories. Let that sink in. They're trying to force inject you with a poison, and they don't even know what your cells are made of. Now, we have some amazing biologists. We go back in time. We go back over 100 years ago, and when we look at, they were born 100 years ago, but their work was in the late 1900s, and we see the work of Gilbert Ling and Harold Hillman. And Thomas Cowan, who is an occultist, he makes this point. Both biologists, Gilbert Ling and Harold Hillman, pointed out that the biology of the past 100 years is fraught with problems related to how data is obtained. Their work is invaluable in grounding us in reality of what exists in living systems and differentiating what exists from what is an artifact. The word artifact refers to a crucial to understand concept that what we see through the use of an imaging or interpretative technique might not reflect morphology or activity of that structure when it is found in a living, intact organism. This is especially the case with the invention and use of the electron microscope. And as a microscopist, I can tell you this is a fact. Germ theory. What is it? We've been hearing this germ versus terrain. The picture on the left perfectly shows what germ theory is. And in this picture, you have soldiers with guns and they're running looking for things to kill. And that is the one word that sums up germ theory. That's their purpose. Kill, kill, kill. Fight. First line of defense. You've heard that describe your probiotics. This military terminology, why is it in medicine? Who put it there? I mean, it makes you think. I wonder if the military industry did, and I believe they did. So that's germ theory. Now let's look at terrain. The terrain approach, you don't have soldiers with guns running through your body shooting some, microbes, some of them imaginary. You have janitorial engineers. And instead of guns, they have mops and brooms, and they're taking out the trash. And it's a detoxification system, not an immune system. And it's peaceful. Another way to describe germ versus terrain is the classic fishbowl. You see, if the sickest fish, do you treat the fish or do you change the water in the fish tank? I would say clean up the terrain. Germ theory. Germ theory, what is it? So these are some of the basic premises found in germ theory. Now, germ theory believes microbes cause disease. Therefore, a doctor must kill the microbes, and he must use killing substances like antibiotics, antifungals, chemotherapy, radiation, various drugs, and procedures to kill microbes. The concept of microbial contamination is only found in germ theory. This believes that disease is caused and spread by external forces. Therefore, you're a helpless victim and you need an external solution outside of yourself. And external solution, of course, is going to be provided by one of the medical doctors, never the patient. You're not smart enough to figure it out. They're going to tell you that in order to get well, you have to go see them and take their drugs. And they believe there's a pill for every ill, and that's for life. One pill for each ill. And there's also something called standard of care. And this limits the doctor. This is where the doctor can only follow the standard of care and not give you natural healing modalities. Now, some of them have realized, that's not going to be too good for our pocketbook. We got to blend in some holistic health care because people are wising up and they really don't want our drugs. So if we just kind of blend it with some nutritional therapy, then we might can continue our racket. And that's what you're seeing. But they do have a standard of care. And if you go to the hospital and you're expecting to be served green juices, you're not going to get it. It's not in the standard of care book. And here's an interesting thing. Not too far back in time, very recent. I remember 20 years ago having conversations with doctors that actually believed that the body should be sterile. They really thought they could sterilize the body and then rebuild it all over again. And up until just a few years ago, they believed the body should be sterile and that they were on this mission to eradicate every single microbe they could find inside the body. And then they were so funny. They were so arrogant about probiotics and the gut biome. That terminology hadn't come forth yet. Now they act like they own it. So I find that very interesting. The body, it's not sterile. It's full of microbes. And the AMA still does not believe in auto intoxication. This is where you are fermenting. This is where you're producing your own toxins because you're full of toxic waste. You're not eliminating waste or acid properly, and they're accumulating in your tissues. That is what is called auto intoxication. Unfortunately, the AMA still does not understand that. Now, I think this cartoon from the early 1900s really sums it up well. If the germ theory of disease were correct, there would be no one living to believe it. Dr. B.J. Palmer. This is a great cartoon. All the scary diseases, all of them, from the 1918 flu to smallpox, chickenpox, typhoid fever, measles, polio, etc., all are scientifically explained and was not cured by a jab. There is never a need for a vaccination, a jab, an injection. There's never a need. And there's no need for masks. And as you can see in this picture, during the flu of 1918, you can see this wasn't actually, a staged photo. This was actually them trying to make a statement. This is a conceptual presentation, and I'm going to introduce these thoughts for you to further research. So we're going to fast forward in time almost 100 years, and we're basically standing in the same place that picture was taken, looking at the people on the sidewalk, and what do you see? 2 + 2 = 5. How did we get into this mess? We are in this biologic mess because of theory and excellent propaganda techniques. But most difficult to accept is that it was planned over centuries by an evil mastermind to suppress truth, destroy health, and ultimately gain control over the entire medical and scientific community and world population. You see, that's why people don't want to believe it. They just can't believe that this could be planned out strategy that would involve the entire world. Now, let's take a look at the history of the evolution of the cause of disease. So we're going to go back in time and look and see, when did this come on scene? When did people start thinking there was this imaginary germ floating through the air that jumps into you and makes you sick? So we look at the cause of pestilence, disease, from the supernatural to miasma. So the ancient worldly people believed that the cause of any disease were supernatural powers or demons, and the cure was magic. We have the Greek physician Hippocrates believed that bad air could be the cause of any pestilence, the fatal epidemic. And then we look at Galen, who expanded upon the theory of bad air by tracing how much the presence of bad air would harm the human body, and concluded the cause of any disease is the corruption of air. The word miasma comes from the ancient Greek and means pollution, and that idea gave rise to the name malaria, literally bad air, through medieval Italian. The miasma theory only stated the bad air, or miasma, was the main cause of every disease, but according to germ theory, the diseases are spread and caused by the presence and actions of specific microorganisms within the body through many mediums such as water, food, and contact. Now, what sparked the need to replace miasma with germ theory? Well, we had three situations going on in Europe. We had one, cholera. Now it was cured with the terrain approach, no vaccine. And then we have superstition. It was created by the papacy in the Dark Ages. And then we have scientific jealousy, uncontrollable and unauthorized new ideas. Now, the first originators of the germ theory, where did they come from? Well, this picture sums it up. All roads lead to Rome. And it's two-way roads. All the information coming in, all the information going out. One entity controls all medical information, universities, medical schools, textbooks, all studies, all scientific fields, all physicians, scientists, engineers, beginning in the Dark Ages through today. Now, there are many people, and they see that this started long ago, but they just go back in time just to the Rockefellers. They think, oh, it was just the Rockefellers that destroyed medicine. I tell you, they were just puppets of this entity. They were not the originators. German contagion theory, the Catholic connection. We can trace germ theory back to these two Jesuit priests. These were the major ones. There were a few more other little players leading up to it, but these were the guys that implemented it. And so we have this one here and the one at the bottom, and you can read this at your leisure if you'd like. We fast forward 200 years. Scientists in the 1800s were seeking answers to three questions. What is living matter? How does living matter come into being? And what causes fermentation or rotting? Silkworms and wine crops were being decimated in France. Two men were working on the problem. Béchamp, the one pictured, the one on the right, was the one that solved it. And then the infamous Pasteur, he was the one who claimed to have solved it, but he didn't. Pasteur admittedly believed in spontaneous generation, yet would flip-flop his position. Béchamp experimented with his hypothesis of biogenesis, that life came from life. This is an excellent book to read. Now, Pasteur claimed to have the knowledge of Béchamp, but he was truly ignorant of what it meant. And you can read all about it in his books. This is not a secret. It was interesting, though, to find out he was a devout Catholic, a mediocre chemist, a clever con man, protected and promoted to bury Béchamp's scientific work. Pasteur was an impostor who stole the work of Béchamp and promoted it as his own. He was well connected. He was financed. He was very political. Does that remind you of anybody today? I kind of think it's identical with Fauci. The history of Pasteur and Béchamp will not be found online, but you will need to order the books given later in this presentation. Like all true science and health, the internet is censoring the information. It'll be very difficult to find it unless you know exactly where to look. And it is, kind of, I don't know if this is true or not. People argue very strongly against this, but I'd like to believe it's true. On his deathbed, Pasteur said, "The germ is nothing, the terrain is everything." Now, how do we know he's a con man? Well, he couldn't keep it a secret. He kept a journal and he wrote down that he was a con man. He literally did. So he kept his research journals, his personal diary, and he asked his family to never, ever reveal it to the public. But 1993, we see that that didn't happen. 1993, Professor Gerard Geeson published an analysis in English that revealed that Pasteur had committed massive fraud. Let me say that again, massive fraud in all his studies. For example, vaccinated animals, if they survived, had not been subjected to experimental cadaver toxins, but the control group animals that died without vaccines died of that kind of poisoning. So he was manipulating the tests to get the conclusions he wanted to present. And Pasteur admitted to falsifying his findings. The problem here is that today's worldview on pathogens is based on fraud. Hence, vaccines are promoted so that we build our immunity to these so-called pathogens. And the building of immunity is another one. Béchamp was the first to scientifically disprove spontaneous generation that Pasteur kept pushing. So Béchamp scientifically disproved Pasteur's spontaneous generation, which had purported such things as that the origin of flies was feces and that rats were formed from garbage heaps. History records Pasteur is the first to do so, though again, Pasteur's writing on the subject were confused for some years thereafter. So it was many years later that Pasteur even claimed at an international medical congress in London, England, that Béchamp still believed upon spontaneous generation and that any truth found in the works of Béchamp was plagiarized from Pasteur. But unbeknownst to Pasteur, that grand old master Béchamp was in the audience, and he stood to challenge the alleged master Pasteur, noting that he had documentation that proved Pasteur to be the plagiarizer of his work. Pasteur turned, walked off the platform without a sound. He would have been exposed and revealed for the fool and fraud that he was if he had done anything else. Now we move on to Robert Koch and the Koch postulates. And so these are quite famous. I know you must have heard them if you've ever taken a science class. So he developed these in the 1887, and he set forth rules by which microorganisms could be ruled as the cause of a disease or discounted as non-pathogenic good germs. So you can read here, these are the 4 rules that he was trying to create to prove germ theory. But the problem was other scientists were going, this is ridiculous. This doesn't really prove anything. This isn't working. And they certainly weren't following themselves. Now, germ theory cannot fulfill Koch's postulates or even the newer Henry's postulates. So since they can't fulfill them, the scientific community now denies Koch's postulates plausibility, but only with the virus. They say, oh, it works for bacteria, just not viruses. Now, Koch, this is their quote, Koch's postulates are no longer fit for purpose. So when it doesn't suit their purposes, they just throw it out the window. How convenient for them. What is more, used uncritically, they have the potential to mislead. Their main purpose now is to provide a framework to ensure that scientific rigor is applied when proposing an organism as the cause of disease. I like what Béchamp said. There's no doctrine so false that it does not contain some particle of truth. Now we have Eli Metchnikoff. I kind of really like this guy. He's got some good qualities when you read about him. So he bolstered the shaky germ theory of disease by revealing a novel concept, leukocytic phagocytosis, how certain white blood cells engulf foreign agents in the circulating blood and tissues, starting the indomitable theory of immunology. The newly developed concepts of Metchnikoff provided a theory, here's that word again, theory, to explain the obvious inadequacies of the germ theory, which was why everyone exposed to the same microbe didn't develop the disease. See, they had a problem. There were too many problems with the germ theory, so now they're creating new theories to bolster it, and this was one of them. And immunology was proven not to be true. So Metchnikoff, he was kind of finding the truth, but he couldn't believe it. And he was the father of probiotics, by the way. So Metchnikoff said, these wandering cells in the body of the larva of a starfish, these cells eat food, but they must eat up microbes too. Of course, the wandering cells are what protect the starfish from the microbes. Our wandering cells, the white cells of our blood, they must be what protects us from invading germs. To test his hypothesis, he inserted small thorns from garden plants into the starfish larva. The following morning, he noted that the cells within the larva were no longer moving around aimlessly, but were instead aggregated around the foreign bodies as if to drive them out. He believed the white cells attacked the foreign invaders. You see, it was all what you were seeing when you looked down the microscope. These gentlemen, the germ theory gentlemen, they looked down that scope and they saw a fight. They saw war going on. And they falsely thought the white blood cells were attacking things. They didn't see that the white blood cells were janitors and they're there to clean up things. They're not attacking the microbes. He believed that the aging body was gradually poisoned by waste products from harmful bacteria in the intestines, which could be neutralized by the yogurt and sour milk. And in this regard, he was presenting terrain approach, yet he promoted immunology, which became accepted as a fact, yet never proven. Now we got to back up in time because see, they were presenting this germ theory, but they were doing something before, and the germ theory was actually presented to bolster what they were doing before, and that was mass vaccinations. They were vaccinating before germ theory. That was just there to support the need they felt they had to force vaccinate people. It was kind of like, we have the cure, so germ theory has to be true. And we look at this person here, this character, Edward Jenner, father of vaccination. He was credited for saving millions from smallpox, and he was the reason we had the 1853 forced vaccination program in the UK. And I love this cartoon here from long, long ago. Look at all the body parts people are growing, cowpox body parts, and injecting cowpox directly into people. And what are they doing? They're growing the body parts. Isn't that interesting? It's kind of sad. Nothing new under the sun, right? Kind of reminds you of what we just went through a few years ago. Now we're going to look at our truth hero, Antoine Béchamp. He was one of France's most prominent active researchers in biology. His degrees and accomplishments, they're so hard, so long to list. It takes 8 pages, typed pages, listing out all his credentials, his awards, all his training and studies. He was not only a true scientist, he was a true doctor. He was a clinical doctor. He actually worked with people, unlike Pasteur. And after his death, oh, people mourned for him. He was much loved. He just didn't have the money and the political backing that Pasteur had. And it's interesting, his colleagues wrote, those of his acquaintance who cared for him and were about to know that he never doubted that one day justice would be rendered him, and he would receive an honorable place among the founders of biological chemistry. And that's what the Journal of Nature wrote in his obituary. Béchamp discovered what we know in pleomorphism as a microzyma, a small ferment body, the basic structure of cell life, and that germs definitely are the result, not the cause of disease. Through his experiments, he showed the vital characteristics of cells and germs are determined by the soil in which their microzyma feed, grow, and multiply in the human body. Both the normal cell and germ, let me say that again, both the normal cell and germ have constructive work to do. The cells organize tissues and organs in the human body. Germs, microbes, cleanse the human system, free it from accumulation of pathogenic mucoid matter. They are not the enemy. It is the builder and destroyer of cells. It precedes life at the cellular level, and it is the foundation of all biological organization. It's like the quarterback in the blood, telling everybody what to do. That's what those little microzymas are. In healthy condition, the microzymas have a beneficial relationship with the organism, and fermentation occurs normally. Microzyma is also called a protid or a somatid. Just depends on the scientist who is looking down the microscope. You know, they didn't have internet back then. They weren't really communicating, no cell phones to say, hey, this is what I'm observing in a microscope. And so we had many scientists looking down a microscope, all seeing the microzymas. Béchamp called them microzymas. Another scientist called them protids. Another one called them somatids. But they were considered indestructible. Now, I don't know if I can say that. I can just say as of today, we haven't been able to destroy them. And boy, we've tried. And so I can just say as of today, we haven't figured that out, how to destroy those little guys. And when they finish their work, and that work is, if you're living, they help you live. If you're dying, they help you die. And when you die, they eat you. And you go back into the ground from whence you came. From dust thou art, to dust thou shalt return. Yeah. And then they go back into the earth. And then they come up as a plant or in another biological form. Now, microzymas are very sensitive to biological signals, responding to changes in the terrain, especially pH and oxygenation and stagnation. When the terrain becomes compromised, the microzymas become what Béchamp called morbidly evolved. Now, I would say pathogenically evolved, changing into microscopic forms, bacteria that contribute to the development of illness. So they go bacteria to yeast to fungus to mold. And Béchamp believed this characteristic to be linked to the function of microzymas to recycle the body upon death. We also know it as the carbon cycle of life. That's the mechanism, how it worked. Now, Béchamp, he did not deny that air carried germs, but maintained that they were not primarily responsible and certainly not necessary for disease. They are only present because of the compromised terrain. So a good analogy is from Dr. Rudolf Virchow. Mosquitoes seek the stagnant water, but do not cause the pool to become stagnant. Now we move on to our next health hero, our truth hero, Gunther Enderlein, terrain. So we have a German zoologist, and he came up with the proofs for pleomorphism, which is where we're looking further. He built upon the work of Béchamp. Béchamp saw the microzymas, but Enderlein was really fully developing the pleomorphic understanding that is unrefuted to this day. And as a microscopist, you will study his work on this. He showed that the proteid, because that's what he called it, not the cell, the proteid, not the cell, is the smallest biological unit of life. Proteids are small living protein particles found in all cells, blood, and other fluids of all living organisms. He also found that blood is not sterile and that it contains tiny life forms capable of evolving into more complex pathogenic organisms when the conditions are right or favorable. And was able to see that the proteids, because he was able to see them because he was using live blood in a dark field microscope and could see organisms as small as 0.01 micron, the size attributed to the fake modern virus. And then we move on to our next truth hero, Royal Rife. Now, many people know Royal Rife is making a frequency generator, but I know him because he made this amazing universal microscope, which allowed him to visualize supposedly the cancer virus. When you read his original writings, of which I used to have, you will see he was actually a true terrain practitioner. Germ theory people like to take it and twist his writings, but I've read his original writings and they are more terrain than germ theory. Now, a great book by Barry Lyons, The Cancer Cure That Worked. He died a very sad death. He died an alcoholic and penniless, but he was truly a brilliant mind. But he couldn't understand why in the 1950s, when he found the cure for cancer, the Cancer Society wasn't interested. He just couldn't get the politics and the money and the power that the Cancer Society was all about. Now, his microscope amplified, supposedly, because we don't have one today to verify, supposedly 60,000 times without killing the specimens. I do 100 times. I can only imagine what I could see. 60,000 time magnification. Wow, that must have been incredible. He subjected the blood slide to frequencies projected from a radio tube to determine the mortal oscillating frequency. And the patient was then treated with the MOF, which eradicated the cancer. Now, what's really interesting, because I've had some of his devices, or people that say they're Rife, I haven't hit his, but they say they're Rife devices, and when you study Rife's writings and you see the two working together, his writings and the Rife generators, Rife, he could kill these organisms, but he couldn't understand why they kept coming back. And that was bothering him. He said, he goes, I just killed that thing. Why is it coming back again? He didn't quite understand that whole terrain thing, but he was more terrain than germ theory. And then we move on to Gaston Naessens. He lived in Canada, truth hero. I don't know the time of his death. I couldn't see if he had died when I first made this presentation in 2021. He developed another microscope called the somatoscope, and he allowed the visualizations of the microzymas, the proteids, and he termed them somatids. And this is why it's so confusing, because you're going to hear it called proteids, somatids, and microzymas, and you're going to go, what are we talking about? And so he further developed the pleomorphic cycle. And there's a book, Persecution and Trial of Gaston Naessens. There's another good book to read. The problem is he developed this product, the 714X, which is named after his birthday. He was into numbers. So I really have tried doing the research on if he was associated with the occult, and I couldn't find that connection. So if somebody does, I would love to see it. Now let's take a little bit closer look at pleomorphism that was developed by Enderlein and also Naessens. So here's Naessens, and we're going to use his term somatids. And this is what it all starts out with. From dust thou art. From dust thou art. So we start out with somatids. And the first 5 forms that the somatids change into, that's what pleomorphism means. It means change. The first 5 forms are beneficial. And they go from a somatid to a spore and into a bacteria. And unless you correct your terrain, you start moving back towards health, healthy lifestyle, healthy living, normal pH, normal oxygenation, perfect circulation, no congestion. And unless you move back towards that, it will progress. It will turn into double spore bacterias, into rods, it will burst, it will form yeast, it will then form fungus. You're going to have a lot of mycotoxins, and you're going to start having some serious symptoms when you're in this stage of pleomorphism towards closer to the end. And then from fungus, you start molding. See, we don't get old, we mold. And then you die. And then those little guys, they consume you. That's why we don't have Twinkie bodies laying around all over the earth. Have you ever wondered that? What happens to all these dead things when they die? Well, they're consumed, and they're consumed by the pleomorphic cycle. And then after you're consumed and you've gone back into the ground from whence you came, from dust thou art, to dust thou shalt return, then the little guy reverts all the way back to the somatid, and he goes back into the ground from whence he came. You know, what's interesting is all the ways that science has tried to kill these little guys. I find it's strange. Here's what it says here. Even stranger, over the years, the somatids were revealed to be virtually indestructible. They have resisted exposure to carbonization temperatures of 200 degrees Celsius and more. They survived exposure to 50,000 rems of nuclear radiation. I don't know about that, but far more than enough to kill any living thing, and they have been totally unaffected by any acid. Taken from centrifuge residues, they have been found impossible to cut with a diamond knife, so unbelievably impervious to any such attempts is their hardness. This gives me much hope with people that are vaccinating. You see, I really believe that these modern scientists, these Frankensteins, they don't really fully understand how the body works. And I think these heroes called the microzymas or somatids, whatever you want to call them, I think that's the reason why they got to keep vaccinating. They can't just do one and done. They got to keep vaccinating you over and over again. Béchamp. Organisms always in you, called microzymas, protists, somatids, and they are the same thing, just observed by different scientists naming what they saw different names. So depending on the terrain, the environment, these organisms are either beneficial or harmful, and you determine what they are, what you eat, what you drink, what you think, and what you breathe. Now we're going to fast forward to another truth hero, Florence Nightingale. She said this great quote. She didn't have faith. She wasn't a person of faith, but God had given her insight and a strong will and a determination. And I love her biography. She said, true nursing ignores infection except to prevent it. Cleanliness and fresh air from open windows with unremitting attention to the patient are the only defense a true nurse either asks or needs. The specific disease doctrine is the grand refuge of weak, uncultured, unstable minds, such as now rule in the medical profession. There are no specific diseases. There are specific disease conditions. So, with such excellent scientific evidence for terrain approach, how did germ theory win? Well, this is the end of part 1. We'll have to check back for part 2, where we answer that question and go into what is terrain.